Welcome to today's webinar entitled TB and Tobacco Assessment and Practical Counseling Skills, sponsored by the Southeastern National TB Center. My name is Karen Simpson. I'm Co-Executive Director at the SNTC, and I'm moderating today's webinar. Our speaker today is Stephanie Nixon. She's a training coordinator and specialist at the SNTC at the University of Florida. She's a certified health education specialist and certified in public health. Before coming to SNTC, she was the training coordinator for the Swanee River Area Health Education Center, where she provided trainings on the effects of tobacco and cessation counseling techniques for healthcare professional students. She is a certified tobacco treatment specialist, and she continues to help tobacco users quit their nicotine addiction through in-person counseling groups. Now I'll turn this over to Stephanie. Stephanie?
Can everybody hear me?
Sounds great.
We do. Perfect. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us for the third webinar in this TB and tobacco series. We're going to be focusing today on assessment of tobacco and how to counsel your patients on behavior change. So here are the objectives for today's webinar. We're going to talk about assessing the level of nicotine dependence in your patient, as well as how to assess their history with tobacco. We'll then move on to talking about how you can use the stages of change model when assessing your patients, and then we'll start talking a little bit about triggers to tobacco use and solutions to those common triggers. So if you've been joining us for the previous webinars, some of this is going to look a little familiar to you, but for those who haven't, I just want to go over some of the things we've covered up until this point, just so that we're all starting out on the same page. And if you weren't able to join us for those webinars, those have been archived and they're now available. So the link between tobacco and TB. We know that TB patients who are smokers are more likely to have a cough, to have pulmonary TB, have cavitary lesions in their lungs, and be sputum positive. And those who smoke are more likely to spread TB than are non-smokers. So some of the effects of tobacco and TB: a weakened immune system, increased risk for diabetes, they're more likely to use alcohol, and at an increased risk for respiratory diseases. And you can see, just looking at that list, how that can really have an effect on somebody who has TB. Now, when it comes to treating people who are using tobacco, there is a method to the madness. I know sometimes it gets confusing because there's so many different paths you can take, but this is a really nice, simple algorithm just to see what you should do for a patient who's using tobacco. So if they are using tobacco and they are willing to quit, you can go ahead and start providing tobacco dependence treatments. If they are using tobacco and they're not willing to quit, now we need to start doing some motivation to try to get them to at least consider doing a quit attempt. Now, if you're engaging with a patient who used tobacco at some point in time, you want to make sure that we're preventing them from relapsing and using it again. And let's say you have a patient, they've never used tobacco before, they aren't using it now. You still want to encourage that continued abstinence, because though it's rare, people can start using tobacco later on in life. So this is what we really focused on the last webinar. It's just the 5 A's model for treating tobacco use and dependence. You want to ask about tobacco use at every visit for every patient. Last week, I could have been doing great. I wasn't using tobacco. And then this week, a stressful event could have occurred, and I relapsed, and now I'm smoking even more than I did. So it can change. So you want to make sure you're always asking. Obviously, advise them to quit. Assess their willingness to make a quit attempt. And we're really going to dive into that during this webinar, because we want to see, are they willing to make a quit attempt at this time? Assist them in a quit attempt. Too often, our healthcare providers do ask about tobacco use. They do advise them to quit, and they assess their willingness to make a quit attempt, but they don't help them. So this is where we're going to start teaching you, how can you help your patient? And then arranging a follow-up. So those are just some of the things in a very, very brief summary of the things that we've covered in our previous webinars. So now we're going to talk a little bit about how to assess your patient's level of nicotine dependence. So we have 2 ways of doing this. I'm going to briefly mention the carbon monoxide monitor just because I think it's a great tool to use, but I know not everybody can have access to something like that. And it's just measuring the amount of carbon monoxide in your body. When I use this with our clients, I find that people, they want to get a high number. That's before they realize what a high number means. And for those who don't know, on this carbon monoxide monitor, you want a low number. The 0 to 6 is the range for a non-smoker. And the people I get in my classes are usually in the 40s, 50s. I've had somebody go up to a 99, and that was a little concerning. But it's a great tool, and when you use it consistently after somebody has quit, they can see their number going down. It's very powerful. But again, not everybody has access to this. So we also have what's called a Fagerstrom nicotine tolerance questionnaire. And that's also a great tool just to see how dependent on nicotine your patient is. So this is a series of questions. The first one being, how many cigarettes do you smoke per day? Now this is what you want to be asking your patient. And then you can see the different answers below. Just a quick note, you have about an average of 20 cigarettes in one pack, just to put that in a frame of reference. And again, most people I talk to are starting at that 20. They're usually smoking at least a pack a day, if not more. Second question, how soon after you wake up do you smoke your first cigarette? So we know the sooner you smoke when waking up, the more addicted you tend to be to nicotine. In general, that's not always the case, but for the most part, that's what we see. And then you can also see the scoring. So as you're going through this on a handout or on a piece of paper, you want to keep track of what their score is. Third question, do you find it difficult to refrain from smoking in places where smoking is not allowed? So for example, hospitals or government offices, the movies, or the libraries. Do you smoke more during the first hours of waking than during the rest of the day? Which cigarette would you be the most unwilling to give up? And you can see the scoring again on the side. Do you smoke even when you're very ill? Now think about your TB patients. They're already struggling with managing their TB. They're not feeling so great. Are they willing to give up smoking during this time, or are they still smoking even though they don't feel well? So scoring. Now, if their scoring is 0 to 3, they have a pretty low nicotine dependence. They would benefit from counseling, but we would not recommend pharmacotherapy at that time. If they're scoring between a 4 and a 6, they have about a moderate physical dependency. We do have a need for counseling if they're scoring in this range, and you might recommend NRT or pharmacotherapy. Again, you have to just talk to your patient and see what seems like it'll be the best avenue for them. Now, if you're scoring in that 7 to 10 range, and that's usually the people that come to us, you have a strong physical dependence. You require counseling. At that point, it's not an option. We talked about in one of our earlier webinars, tobacco or nicotine addiction is a two-part addiction. It's physical, but it's also behavioral. You've got to counsel this particular group to make sure that they have their best chance for quitting. And we definitely would recommend NRT or pharmacotherapy. Now, let's say you say, Stephanie, I have too much to do. You're asking me to do one more thing, and people are asking me to do more and more with less and less time. That's okay. Out of all of what I just told you, there are two main questions that you can ask your patient, and it might take up to a minute, probably less. Just ask them, how many cigarettes do they smoke per day? If they're in that 21 to 30 or 31 or more, they're heavily dependent on nicotine. And then how soon after you wake up do you smoke your first cigarette? If it's in that 0 to 5 minute range, which is normal for tobacco users, they're highly addictive. And we'll talk about this in the next webinar on pharmacotherapy, but those are the two questions we ask to help dose people for the NRT and the pharmacotherapy. So those are two key questions I want to make sure that you remember. So now let's talk a little bit about how to assess your patient's history with tobacco use. It's really important to get a complete sense of their battle and their experiences with this addiction, because they're bringing all of that to you when you talk to them about this. So their tobacco use experience, or their history. Talk to them about their first experience with tobacco. How old were they? Under what circumstances did they decide to start smoking or use dip? How soon did it take before they started using it daily? And then how many years have they been using tobacco? And then a lot of you are probably already familiar with taking a medical history, but start asking about any tobacco-related illnesses in the patient and then again in their family, and then any current medications that they're taking, because again, the whole goal of this is that you're eventually going to start figuring out Do they want patches, gum, maybe a nicotine inhaler? Maybe they need to try Chantix. Those are some of the things you've got to know what they've experienced in their past to decide how you're going to dose them. And again, that's something that we'll be covering on our next webinar. So assess their quit history, find out their past successes, and find out times that maybe they failed. And I say that to say a failure is not necessarily a failure, especially when it comes to quitting. You just simply learn what works for you and what doesn't work. And when I talk to people about quitting, I like to hear that people have tried to quit before, and even if they failed, I ask them, well, what happened? So then when we go to this quit attempt, don't try to do the same thing that didn't work in the past. You're that much closer to quitting because you know what worked. Any previous NRT experience, that's very important. People will come to you saying, well, I already tried this, or I tried that and it didn't work for me. You want to know what did they use and how did they use it. Maybe they weren't using the products correctly. What methods did they use? Maybe they quit cold turkey and it was a horrible experience for them. That's important to know. How long did they quit? And even if they only quit for, let's say, a week, we still always want to commend them for that quit attempt because that was still a big deal to them, and that was still a period of time where they did not use tobacco. So you want to find out what were they able to do to be successful during that amount of time. Any withdrawal symptoms that they experienced, and then reasons for relapses. Again, it's important to know what happened that last time. Why did you start smoking again when you're going through that quit attempt? These are all important things to gather when you're assessing that history. So your environment or your social history. What does your work environment look like? What about your living environment? Maybe you have TB. Maybe you are trying to quit, but a spouse or your children, are they smoking? Are you still around secondhand smoke? Do you have any social pressures? Maybe people are trying to pressure you to quit, or the opposite is true. Maybe there are people, your entire social circle, who are encouraging you to keep smoking. Maybe that's something they all like to do. And then stress levels. Again, we're talking about people who have TB, so that's a huge stressor in itself. But find out what else is going on. These are things we really need to assess. And then the patient's reasons for quitting. So you want to find out what are their thoughts about quitting, what are their concerns about quitting. And there's a technique that I talk about throughout, but I never mention it by name, called motivational interviewing. And that whole concept is that you want to get the patient talking. It's a person-centered counseling technique. So you have to find out why they want to quit. You as a healthcare provider might have a long list of why they should quit. But in this scenario and in this context, we want to find out what's important to them because that's what we have to draw on. And then looking at ecological factors. What are their cues to using tobacco? Maybe it's alcohol, and in most cases it is. We know that people smoke a lot more when they're using alcohol. And then we also know that people who are using alcohol tend to smoke more as well. Maybe it's coffee. Is it that you see other people smoke? That can be a difficult one if you are trying to quit, but as soon as you see somebody else smoking, that makes you want to light up. And then again, stress, which is a huge one. That's the number one cause of relapse. You've got to be aware of what's causing you to use tobacco, and it's important that patients start identifying their personal cues. So how does the patient cope with difficulties in their life? How are they coping with TB? That's important to know. If they're doing well, we know that they have some type of coping mechanism that's healthy in place. If they're not, we might need to explore that a little bit more. How are they coping in a crisis? And again, how do they manage their stress levels? Now, setting goals. We need to agree on what does success look like when you're talking to a patient. What is the best outcome? In a perfect world, we want them to quit and never pick it up. Now, what does some success look like? Maybe that's that they've cut down, so they haven't completely quit, but maybe we went from smoking 3 packs a day or using 2 cans of dip per day, and now we're down to 1 pack a day or 1 can of dip per day. So that's some success. That's important. And then looking at what's an unfavorable outcome. And then it's not enough to identify maybe you're smoking more, maybe something happened, but what's your plan for that unfavorable outcome? So now we're going to talk a little bit about the 5 stages of change and how this relates to talking to your patients. So the stages of change model, the whole concept with this is that behavior change is a process. It's not an event. If you think about a time you tried to change your own behavior, let's say eating, there has never been a time where you said, I am never going to eat pizza again. I'm never going to eat a burger again or ice cream, whatever it is. And you went from eating it to not eating it, and you never slipped. It's the same with tobacco use. We will eventually get to that point, but we're going to always be cycling through, and sometimes relapse happens. And I would love for this image to have relapse in the middle because it's a part of our behavior change, and it's something we have to acknowledge. And this is useful for any type of behavior change just to get a sense of where your patient is, and we have strategies for how you counsel your patients depending on which stage they're in. So pre-contemplation. These are the people who say, no way, Jose, I'm not quitting. I don't want to quit. I see nothing wrong with what I'm doing. They have no intention of taking any action within this next 6 months. It's really not on their radar. So we really need to increase the awareness of need for change with them and then start personalizing information about the risks and the benefits. And this group, they tend to be defensive. The people I talk to that are in this stage, they almost expect you to start preaching at them. So you need to go ahead and decrease that defensiveness and really just start talking to them. Listen to them, use reflective listening, repeat back what you hear them saying, and listen with empathy. A lot of times they're coming to you with a lot of baggage and they want somebody to listen to them. And then be patient with them, and then also remember it's their choice and we have to respect their choice at this time. We just want them to start thinking about quitting and maybe bumping them to the next stage. So contemplation. These are the people that they're starting to think about it. They intend to take some action in the next 6 months, but it's not a huge priority right now. So we want to motivate them, encourage them to start making specific plans, address any areas of concern they might have in regards to quitting, and start identifying some of the support systems that they might have in place. We want to start eliciting reasons for them changing and then the risk of not changing again. We want to start pushing them to the next stage. Increase their confidence in quitting and then start emphasizing discrepancy. Again, they're in that in-between phase. They're starting to think about it, and we want to push them on. So we want them to know, for example, I have TB. I want to get better, but I'm still smoking, and I kind of want to quit further down the line. You want to also get better, so you need to start having them realize they can't get better until they start putting down the tobacco. So again, it's just emphasizing where they are and where they want to be, and if their behavior change is helping them get to where they want to be, or is it helping them to remain stuck where they are. Okay, so preparation. These are the people who they're ready. They're ready to start taking action within the next 30 days, and they've started taking some behavioral steps in that direction. So with this group, it's important to develop realistic goals and a timeline for change, not only developing that timeline, but writing it down. It's too easy to change our plans if we only keep it in our head, but when you write it down, you're more likely to stick with that. Strengthen their commitment to change, and then go ahead and set a quit date. Now, if you've ever tried to counsel people on quitting, that is tricky, and you have to do it at the right time. For the people who are ready to start quitting, this is a good time. You can't push it and you can't force it, but you can suggest it and see how they're relating to you when you suggest that. Now for action, they've made the behavior change. They are in it. They've changed their behavior for less than 6 months. So at this point, you want to assist them with feedback, any problem solving that they're having, look at what type of support system they have in place, and then you as a healthcare provider also support their patients' efforts. It's a big deal, and people are proud of this. This might be the hardest thing to do, but it's the most rewarding thing to do, and they want to share it with you, so support that. And then reinforce their behavior. Make sure that they understand this is great, it's fantastic, stick with it. And then maintenance. So you've changed your behavior for more than 6 months. Now we want to maintain that new behavior over the long term. So help them identify any smoking cues that they might be experiencing, any tempting situations and prevention strategies, identify and resolve any problems that they might have brought up to you. Again, the whole point of this is that we're trying not to get them to relapse. And then ask about the positive benefits that the patient has noticed since they quit. Again, that concept of motivational interviewing, it's about what they're experiencing. And we want to stress the positive benefits. It can be hard to quit at sometimes, especially if you go through that withdrawal period, which only lasts maybe 1 or 2 weeks. But we want to see, are you breathing better? Are you feeling better? Do you feel like you're healing quicker? Those are some of the things we want to reinforce with them. And then this is just a nice chart summarizing everything that I pretty much just talked about on one slide. So the next 2 things that we're going to really start focusing on is strategies for dealing with behaviors associated with tobacco use, and then identifying common triggers and then solutions to those triggers. So we've talked a little bit about that stages of change model, and now most of the information that I'm going to start talking about is focused on somebody who is interested in quitting and they're planning on making that quit attempt. So these are not really for the people who are in pre-contemplation. So practical advice. These are things that they can start doing. Setting a quit date, telling family and friends. And I always tell people that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing. If your patient feels like they have a strong support system, suggest that they tell them. If they think their family and friends will start finger wagging at them if they slip or if they won't be as supportive, they do not have to tell anybody that they're quitting. It is a personal decision. If people realize they are no longer smoking or using tobacco, great. If they don't notice, that's great too. Establish quit zones. And I also have no smoking in the house and no smoking in the car. Those are things I suggest people doing up front so they can keep on smoking. Let's just start establishing where we're not going to smoke. And that's something they can start doing as they build towards ultimately quitting. Now I have a handout in the resources pod, and it's just a survey that your patient that you can use. You can give it to your patients. You don't have to sit there with them while they take it out. Have them fill it out. It will help explain why are they smoking. So we can't make a plan to quit something if we don't know why we're doing it in the first place. Now it'll score them in different categories, and then depending on what they're scoring high in, we have specific strategies that they can use depending on that category, and we'll go over those categories. So in that survey, if they're scoring high in stimulation, they are using tobacco because they need to keep going. I've had somebody who might have been smoking 3 packs a day once, and she worked a day job and a night job, and she kept saying she needed to keep moving. She's got to stay awake. So we suggest if you're scoring high in that, drink plenty of cold water. See if you can take a quick walk. Getting a good night's rest or exercising. Again, your body is a machine. It's telling you, I really just need rest and I need you to give me the fuel that I need. And the tobacco is not what it needs. So people scoring high in handling, they like that feel of it. Smoking or using dip is very ritualistic. If you watch somebody using tobacco, they always hold the pack. They might play with it. They like to tap it in their hand. They'll fiddle with the can. You like that feeling of touching. You like that hand-to-mouth motion. So doodle. They're coming up with adult coloring books. You can get a child coloring book. You can keep your hands busy. A lot of times people really love to use tobacco while they're on the phone. So make sure you keep a pad of paper and a pencil or some color pencils so that you can keep doodling. Use a stress ball. Use toothpicks or gum. Take up a hobby. Get fruit or nuts or something you can keep around and keep munching on. Again, we need to keep our hands busy. So pleasure. I'm very upfront with people when I say that if you're scoring high in this, it is going to be a little bit more difficult. You're smoking because you like to do it. It is a great feeling. You're quitting because you know that's what you need to do, but you really just enjoy the tobacco. So you have to remind them of all the benefits of quitting. Remind them that their smell and taste come back, so things will smell and taste a lot better. Remind them how easy it will be to start exercising, and that they're in control. People don't like the tobacco controls them, that if you go to the movies, you might have to leave out because you've got to have that tobacco. Or if you're at a concert, you've got to go out because you have that tobacco. You're not in charge of your life anymore, so they're getting that control back. And then again, relaxation, which I said earlier, stress is the #1 cause of relapse. So use relaxation techniques to calm down when you're angry or you're upset. And again, if we're talking about TB patients, what might happen if you come and say, oh, this treatment is not working, it might have to be extended. That moment right there could be enough to stress somebody out to where they might want to go smoke or use some type of tobacco. We're now trying to say, don't use the tobacco, use something else to calm you down. Deep breathing exercises, exercising regularly, again, depending on what stage of treatment they are in, it depends on what type of exercise they can do and if they even feel up to doing it. Avoiding stressful situations, which I'm sure a lot of us would love to do, but in the real world, we can't always do that. So if you can't get away from a stressful situation, we need to try and use some of these other strategies. And then remind them that tobacco is not going to solve the problem. You can go and use the tobacco. Your patient can go and use the tobacco, and when they come back, the problem is still there. So I think sometimes that's when we have to be very honest with our patients and let them know this isn't going to do anything for you, so why don't we find some other ways to help deal with your stress. And then craving. Everybody should be scoring high in this because nicotine is addictive. So we suggest talking to a doctor about using NRT. Keep away from the tobacco. Get rid of your ashtrays. And then those triggers. It's important that we avoid triggers as much as possible in dealing with this. So craving and habit are a little bit different. Craving is when you really, really want it. But habit is when you're kind of doing something that you don't want to do anymore, but you're used to doing it. So if you have a patient scoring high in this, it's actually easier for them to quit because they just need to remind themselves, did I really want this or am I just doing it because I'm used to doing it? So changing their tobacco use routine or keeping tobacco in different places or smoking with the opposite hand. You just need to start changing up what you're doing so that it's almost a trigger to your brain to say, did I really want this or is there something else I could be doing? So this is when I want you to start typing in that chat box where everybody was saying where they were from. What concerns do you commonly hear as to why people are worried about quitting or why now isn't a good time to quit? So if everybody could just start listing out some of the reasons they hear, we can talk about some of those. Okay, gaining weight, I hear that one too. I'm too stressed. I see gaining weight multiple times. Too much going on in my life right now. They like to smoke. No money. Being cranky, that's a big one. You got to die of something. I wish I had $1 for every time I heard that one. I want to be part of the group. Other family members smoke around them. Yep. Unable to exercise due to comorbidities. I've heard that one too, and that can be difficult. I'm just not ready. I get that one too, and at least they're being honest. Calm my nerves. Everyone I work with smokes. That's difficult. I have nothing else to do. And we'll talk about that one, boredom. When you get bored, we start doing things we probably shouldn't be doing, and that's why we always tell people it's important that they keep a long list of things they need to do so that they don't get bored. The only source of stress relief. Okay, so I'm seeing, and I'm starting to see some repeats, so that's good. So you're hearing exactly what I hear when I talk to a lot of other groups. It keeps me from doing my other habit drugs. I've had those people too. So if there's something that we should change that we don't really want to change, we will come up with a reason not to do it. That's how we tend to be. So I'll gain too much weight. I saw several people say that. On average, you might gain 3 to 5 pounds from quitting. But what I tell people is that when you quit, your taste and your smell gets better, so food tastes better. So that's number one. You're going to want to start eating more. And when you quit, you will be hungrier, and your metabolism is going to go down. So when people tell me they've quit before and they gain weight, I've asked them, okay, tell me what you were eating. They start listing McDonald's French fries. They list all this candy. And I tell them, I've never smoked before, but if I ate what you were eating, I would gain the weight too. So it's just important that they know that you're going to be hungrier, know that your metabolism isn't going to be as fast, and adjust. Keep healthy stuff around. And right now we're lucky because the people who are quitting right now, we're in the summer months, so we have all the yummy fruit. We have the watermelon and the blueberries and the strawberries. So I always tell people it's a great time to quit during summer because you have those foods that you can kind of snack on. The winter time, it's a little bit more difficult because there's not too much healthy stuff naturally growing at that time point that people really want to eat. The only source of stress, or there's too much stress in my life to quit, like I said, this is when I have to tell people it's time to be realistic about this quit attempt. We're never going to have a point in our lives where there's no stress. So people have to realize, what else can I do to manage the stress except for smoking? A lot of times people think that's all they can go to because they've done it for so long. They haven't had to come up with other stress management techniques. I don't have the willpower to quit, or I will get irritable when I quit. I saw several people say that. That's part of the withdrawal, and we give you that medicine to take care of that. But a lot of times you might be irritable. Tell people around you, I'm quitting. I might be a little cranky. You can either stay with me and know I'll be cranky, or just stay away from me for a couple of weeks. If you have friends that are smoking around you, or family members, or your spouse will make it hard for you to quit, or you want to fit in, those are difficult. And when I tell people, again, it's a very honest moment with them, is that the coworkers who are smoking, your family who are smoking, their lives aren't more important than your patients. So yes, they're smoking, yes, they're around you, but are you willing to die so that they stay comfortable? You've got to weigh those options. And every time I talk to people who come to us to quit, and I weigh it out for them like that, they have that aha moment when they realize those people's lives aren't more important than mine. I care about my health. I want to get better, so this is what I need to do. So thank you for sharing that. So what to do instead of using tobacco? So when you're in the car, I, again, wish I had $1 for every time somebody told me my car won't start unless I light a cigarette. There are people who, it's almost as if they cannot drive unless they smoke, but we know the car will still run even if they don't smoke. So removing the ashtray out of the car. Sing to the radio, because unless you're very talented, it's going to be a little difficult to be singing and smoking at the same time. Take an alternate route to work, or keep healthy snacks in the car. Again, those are targeting some of those things we talked about earlier in regards to stimulation or that handling. Again, we're trying to change up our routine. So how to face the morning. For those people who first thing in the morning they get up and they smoke, we've got to change our routine. Your brain is very ingrained in what you've been doing while you were smoking. Now we're coming and saying, time to do something different. Maybe instead of picking up a cigarette and going to drink your coffee, maybe you go take a shower, drink coffee, and then you might not want to smoke after you took the shower. Deep breathing, drink the glass of water, avoid triggers. Those are some of the things that you can start doing. And your patient has to start making a list of what their triggers are in that early morning and how to avoid them. So coffee or tea is a big one. I hear a lot of people saying they get their coffee and they smoke. So especially during the first 2 weeks, I suggest if they can, don't drink coffee or tea at all, that's great. Most people look at me like I'm crazy and they say that's not an option. So I tell them, try to switch it to decaf. Try a different brand. Try drinking it out of a different mug. Maybe you take your coffee in the car and you drink the coffee in the car. So now we can't smoke in the car because we're drinking our coffee. Or plan out your day while drinking. Again, it's all about switching up your routine and what you've been doing. So enjoying their meals. So we just said that your sense of taste and smell come back. So stay away from the food that might trigger you. Maybe people are used to smoking, drinking when they have a burger and fries. So maybe during the early weeks of their quit attempt, they stay away from those food triggers. Brushing their teeth using mouthwash. Wash dishes by hand, especially after dinner. I don't know what it is, but people always say they love to smoke right after they eat dinner. So I suggest washing their dishes by hand and then taking a walk after. So boredom. Somebody did mention that they smoke because they have nothing else to do. Again, this is one of those, you got to be honest with your patients. If they do not come up with other activities to do, or carrying a book, do a puzzle, listen to songs, come up with hobbies so that they're not bored, and they start thinking about the fact they want to smoke or they want to use tobacco, they will almost always end up going to do it. And that's the same with, again, any behavior change. If I'm sitting at home bored and I'm really craving McDonald's and I don't find something else to do, I will be in that drive-through line. That seems to be how we're wired. So again, it's very important that we talk with the patients about not getting bored. And then being around other tobacco users. Some of you mentioned that. Ask others to help you in your quit attempt. Sometimes all we have to do is ask somebody. Put a no smoking sign up by your door. If you have a group of people who are smoking, just leave while they smoke and don't return until they're finished. Because again, yes, you've quit, but if you're still hanging around them while they smoke, they're still getting the secondhand smoke. So we have to think about some of those things that we can do. And then relapse prevention. It's important to realize they might have a slip. They might relapse and start using tobacco. And that's okay. It happens, again, with all of us. What's important is to note, what are they going to do after they have that slip? Talk to your patients about what plan do they have in place if they slip up. Let's say they got in a situation, somebody offered them a cigarette, and they smoked it. Does that mean the quit attempt is done? They might as well go back to smoking? Or does it mean acknowledge what happened, write down a plan for how I can avoid that situation in the future, and then keep going? It should be the later, but for some reason, people think if they had one cigarette, that meant it's over, they failed, they might as well go back to smoking, and that's not the case. And then when you're talking to your patients, and I know I keep mentioning stress because it's so important. When I talk to people who are smoking and they say they had quit for 10 years or 20 years, and I ask them what happened, why did you start smoking again? It's always a stressful event. And stress doesn't have to be bad stress. I think we have a negative connotation for stress, but it could be good stress too. You might come and tell your patient your TB treatment is finished. It's completed. Congratulations. And in that moment, that's good stress, they might say, I completed my TB treatment. Life is great. I can just have this one cigarette and I will be fine. And it's in that moment they could slip and they're back to smoking what they used to smoke. So finding out ways to not only manage your bad stress, but manage your good stress as well is important. And you can do that through meditation or exercise, deep breathing, laughter, music, just hobbies. It's about figuring out, what will I do in these circumstances? And then enhancing motivation to quit tobacco. Again, it's important that you make it relevant to your patients. Let them know what the risks are of continuing to smoke, especially while they're on TB treatment. Let them know what the rewards are for quitting. That's important too. We tend to focus too much on the negative. Talk to them about what they'll gain. Have them start mentioning things that they feel they'll gain by quitting. Talk about any of the roadblocks that they might experience. So some of those things we started mentioning, see what concerns they have, and then making sure it's all about repetition. And then I really like this slide, and it doesn't just have to be for the patient who has recently quit. It could be somebody who's quit longer than that. But if you feel like they're having a lack of cessation support, and the case with TB patients, you are seeing them often, so we don't have to worry as much about scheduling follow-up visits, but have them use the quit line if they need additional support and they might not be seeing you when they want. Help them identify sources of support in their own environment, and then you can refer them to an organization that offers counseling. If they're experiencing a negative mood or depression, which does happen, provide some of that counseling or medication, or you might need to refer them to a specialist, and that's okay too. In this case, you have a bond with them, so suggestions or advice is probably more powerful coming from you, but it's okay if you say, this is now out of my realm or my element, I'm not comfortable, but let me get you to somebody who can help you. And then if they're having strong withdrawal symptoms, you can extend the use of the medication that we'll talk about in the next webinar, and you can also combine medication, which again, we'll talk about next webinar. And then that weight gain, that's such a big one, so I try to make sure I really focus on that. Tell your patients to engage in some type of physical activity if they can. There are some times where people can't do the physical activity, and that's okay. That means we now just need to watch what we're eating. And then assure them that weight gain is common, though nobody wants to gain weight no matter how common it is. Keeping a healthy diet, and again, if you're not comfortable getting into some of the details of a healthy diet, refer your patient to a nutritional counselor. That's okay. So this is just some of the ways in which you can really assess your patient for how dependent they are on nicotine and then their history. And then those are those practical counseling skills. This is probably my favorite thing to talk about because it gives you an idea of what can you actually do. And when you talk to your patients about these things, you will see the light bulb go off. It's consistent. When I talk about this to people, that's when they realize, I can do it. And that's what you want to see out of your patient. And then before we take questions, again, I'll just mention we have the webinar on August 22nd, and that's really going to go into pharmacotherapy. That's one I wouldn't miss because there's a lot dealing with the medication that we can give people to treat tobacco. And then September 5th, treating tobacco dependence in special populations. So with that, we can take any questions that people might have.
Hey, Stephanie, we do have a question. Which groups are harder to work with in your opinion?
So if I go back to the different categories people can score high in, it's the people who are scoring high in pleasure, the people who really just enjoy smoking, and they're still a little torn. They enjoy smoking, but they know they need to quit. But then what else are they going to do if they can't smoke? That's a difficult group to work with. And then the people who are in pre-contemplation, and again, my only goal with them is to get them to start thinking about quitting. And once I learned to change my approach in dealing with that group, it did become a lot easier. But people who aren't quite ready to quit and talking to them, and then people who are ready to quit, but they really like doing it. Those are the two groups I've experienced that seem to be a little difficult.
Thanks, Stephanie. And we have a few other questions. First from Angela. How long will patients have symptoms of withdrawal?
I only hear people really talk about it for the first 1 to 2 weeks, usually not longer than 2 weeks. Not to say it doesn't happen, but on average 1 to 2 weeks.
Great. And what do you think is the best resource for managing stress?
So that really depends on the person, and that's why I tell people sometimes you have to try things and work. For example, some people say taking a long bath really helps calm them down and manage stress, but if you told me to do that, that would stress me out even more. So it really depends, and it's really a trial and error of seeing what works and what doesn't work. But I know I tell people go and Google ways to manage stress and see, just try it.
That's good advice. So there's a question, a great question from Pearl. She wants to know, do you include patients who participate in vaping?
So we do include those because we do get them in our groups, and that's, especially when it comes to dosing them for NRT, it's very difficult because there's so many different products and they're all delivering different levels of nicotine. But we do include them because it's still nicotine. They still have a nicotine addiction. They're just getting it through a different delivery device.
Great. And do you have advice, or can you tell us what helps you when you're counseling different groups?
So number one, I have to talk to everybody and find out where are they in their history, what experiences have they had. And sometimes the group is in a consensus, and other times somebody had a great experience, sometimes they didn't. And just making sure as I talk to them, I'm giving advice that targets each group, especially in my case because I'm always counseling a larger group, and by large I mean maybe 5 to 6 people. That's large for a counseling session, but still making sure I give the information that's going to help everybody.
So now we have a question for you about handouts. Are they available in other languages like Spanish, Khmer, and Tagalog?
So I know CDC has a lot of great handouts on their site, and I'm almost positive they'll have it in Spanish. I'm not sure about the other languages, but I would imagine somebody's got to have something in those languages. So I'm sure it exists. I'm just probably only certain about the Spanish.
We'll try to identify some of those and place them in as a resource for everybody. And one last comment. I see Jerry put a nice note in the chat box that folks who are interested in smoker cessation handouts, that they should contact their state health department because a lot of the different states have a lot of handouts in other languages. Thanks, Jerry. Well, I think this will call our webinar today to a close. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We look forward to having you join us for the next one. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.